My trafficker was my husband. There was no way I could reach out to anybody for help.
We're scared. We're scared to run. We're scared to tell anybody what's going on.
It was an incredibly violent situation. I felt like there was no way I could get out.
Human traffickers can be just about anyone from any walk of life. A lot of the trafficking involves domestic servitude, hoteliers, restaurant owners, owners of massage parlors, agricultural farm owners.
It can be a trafficker who tells a woman, I want to be your boyfriend, I love you, and if you love me, you're going to go out and have sex for money. It can be kind of psychological like that, or it can be more overt and more physical. It can be hitting, abusing, keeping them away from any support systems.
Trafficking, it doesn't know any boundaries. The victim can be male, female, transgendered, anyone. And it happens all over America.
I still see this attitude of it's just immigrants or it's just people in other countries. It happens to U.S. citizens so much more than people are aware.
The natural stakeholders in this issue are certainly law enforcement, legal advocates, social service providers. There's other players involved as well.
It is important to engage the community because victims often don't self-identify. They don't come forward to law enforcement.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Citizens in the community are the eyes and the ears.
It's medical workers, it's educators, it's personnel at homeless shelters.
We can't do this alone. No one has the capacity to provide every single thing that a victim or survivor of human trafficking needs.
There has to be a support system within the community, psychological counseling, shelter, and vocational education so they can reintegrate, become a healthy individual.
There's an intentional effort to get everyone together so we know how to share resources, we know how to work together, and to make sure at the end of the day, a victim becomes a survivor.
Good evening, and on behalf of the Southern area of the Links Incorporated, welcome to our town hall meeting focusing on human trafficking, not for sale. I am Sylvia Perry and have the distinct honor of serving as the Southern Area Director. In that capacity, under the umbrella of our national organization, we set the tone of service for our thousands of members located throughout 7 states and the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Our external town hall meetings have included national concerns ranging from Black Lives Matter to voter mobilization. Tonight, we address human trafficking, the term defined by Webster as the illegal practice of procuring or trading in human beings for the purpose of prostitution, forced labor, or other forms of exploitation. As one of our national concerns, human trafficking is particularly prevalent in the South. It is estimated that between 18,000 and 20,000 victims are trafficked into the United States every year. Children are more vulnerable than adults. More than 300,000 young people in the U.S. are considered at risk of sexual exploitation. And when it's a problem affecting our communities of color, it is a problem for Links as community servants. Among this evening's agenda, you will hear startling statistics, firsthand experience, recognizing victims, hands-on efforts to eradicate, and above all, solutions and how we can play a role in our communities and chapters to bring an end to this cancer ruining the lives of young women, men, and children that just could be the stranger next door. I now turn our programming over to this evening's moderator, Mr. Rockman Johnson. Ladies and gentlemen, not for sale.
Sylvia, thanks so much for inviting me to be a part of this illustrious event with the southeast area of the Links Incorporated. And you know, when I got the call about this particular issue, it struck something deep in my heart. As a broadcast journalist and reporter and anchor for so long, I've had a chance to do stories where I talked to people who oftentimes didn't want to give their identity, but one thing they wanted people to know is that this kind of thing still goes on, which is why Not for Sale is so important. Some of the statistics that we look at tell us that worldwide, even though we think we're in a place where things are getting better, the first thing you know is 45.8 million people around the world are still a part of human trafficking in some way, shape, or form. And so having the discussion, creating conversation like this is how we move forward and stop this practice. Now, I could go down the list and give you all of the reasons or all of the different ways that it happens. But what's probably most startling is that it also happens right here in the United States of America. Now, all of us come from different backgrounds, socioeconomically, educationally, all of those things. But one of the things that's so interesting is that in many cases and points, the statistics lead to the fact that some people are even involved in human trafficking and don't even know it themselves. And I let you marinate in that for a minute because it's so important that we have this conversation. Some years ago, I was, as an actor, working for the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. And some of the videos we put together, I'd done some research and I didn't realize how many people were being trafficked who didn't know it here, and people who couldn't speak the language, who didn't understand the culture, were being put into that space. So this is an opportunity for us to have the conversation. So we invite all of you who are watching and listening, first and foremost, to share this broadcast so that other people will be able to chime in, be a part of it, and maybe help someone else. Secondly, we ask that you also come in with questions that you may have. We'll be monitoring the feed here on all of our social media channels, on YouTube, on Facebook, and the other channels. So if you have a question or a comment, or maybe you know some reason or way that we can help stop things, we ask you to join in, leave the information there, and we'll be sure to try to get to every question or comment that comes our way. All right, it looks as though we have Congress, a special guest is coming here tonight, and I'm so honored to introduce a member of the United States House of Representatives who is going to share with us for just a few moments. She is truly a someone who is really doesn't need an introduction, but she serves as the U.S. Representative for Ohio's 3rd Congressional District. She's done that since 2013, a member of the Democratic Party. She was also a member of the Ohio House of Representatives, and of course, she's a member of the Links Incorporated. Please welcome United States Representative Joyce Beatty. Congresswoman Beatty. I think they have you in. Congresswoman, are you with us?
I am. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you perfectly. Thank you so much for joining us, Congresswoman. The floor is yours.
No, I am very excited. First of all, let me just say thank you for not only inviting me, but thank you for talking about an issue that is so dear, not only to me, but to, of course, my link chapters across the country. And we are very honored to be a part of your broadcast tonight. One of the things I wanted to be able to start with, what a wonderful day for us to be doing this on what we are calling Human Trafficking Awareness Day. So it seems quite appropriate that I have the opportunity to come and share with you a few thoughts that human trafficking, if I put it in the real context, it's modern day slavery. And that was in part why I decided when I went to Congress that I was going to make sure that I talked about the human trafficking of women and children. And men is an issue too, at home and abroad, and it affects every community. The issues that I've been working on since I got into Congress, many of my legislative successes have been made in an attempt to address the heartbreaking epidemic of it. One of the very first bills, I remember it like it was yesterday, that I signed into law made it easier to report potential human trafficking to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children cyber tip line. And I can tell you how important that is, that people understood if you see something, say something. And that was what was so important. And I've also had my Human Trafficking Accountability Act enacted into law. And that improved the coordination of trafficking enforcement at the Department of Justice by ensuring that the Department of Justice headquarters and each and every U.S. Attorney's office has someone responsible for enforcing the human trafficking laws. And with each of these bills, I've had a strong partnership and support, because this isn't a red or blue or Republican or Democratic issue. This happens in every city, whether it's the suburbs, whether it is inner city, whether it is our rural communities. And I've been fortunate enough to have a partner with Congresswoman Ann Wagner from Missouri. She also serves with me on the Financial Services Committee on my subcommittee that I chair, and she's the ranking member for diversity and inclusion. Now, we may not agree on everything, but we certainly agree that more can be done to end the exploitation of the most at-risk population against human trafficking. And that's why I'm proud of the work we did with the Stop Enabling Sex Trafficker Act for the fight for online sex trafficking. You know, when you start thinking about how many of our young folks get entrapped because they are on social media, because they are online responding to something that later leads them to something that no one wants to talk about. So this act would make sure that our online platforms are held accountable when they know that human trafficking is happening. So we don't want them to be able to turn a blind eye to human trafficking and what's done through their websites. Now, many folks thought we would never make any headway with this bill because we were taking on the big tech folks. But I can tell you, we actually went to Netflix and we did a mini commercial-like show talking about how important it is for people to stand with us and to support us. And that worked. I am so proud to announce that I will be reintroducing the Trafficking Victim Housing Act. We know that too many victims of trafficking face significant and unique barriers as they recover from their ordeals. And that's because of their circumstances. You know, they can face obstacles to getting stability that they need because they've been unstable for so long. And the number one thing is to be able to secure housing and then maybe employment and to be able to sustain themselves. Well, as a member of the Financial Services Committee, which has the jurisdiction, and this is really important for those listening, the Financial Services Committee has a subcommittee on housing, and it has the jurisdiction over housing policies. So this is an issue that overlaps, that we can look at anti-human trafficking bills and be very inclusive, that we get our colleagues on both sides of the aisle to talk about how we're going to support these individuals that have been victims. And that was part of the very early bill. So often young women predominantly would go out and they would become trafficked. And then what would happen when they would go into the court system, they would be charged with charges such as prostitution. And here is someone who was 13 years old or 15 years old, and they had been in this lifestyle because of human trafficking. And then when there was arrest, it was like it was their fault. So I was so proud that we were able to get the tip line and to be able to make them no longer be charged like they were a criminal. I could go on and tell you, but let me end by saying that this new bill that I'm reintroducing would also direct the United States Interagency on Homelessness and the Advisory Council on Human Trafficking, along with other federal agencies such as HUD, where we're going to have my good friend and colleague now, Congresswoman Marsha Fudge, who will be our new HUD secretary, that we will be able to move towards making housing more accessible and more responsible to the specific needs of trafficking victims who have endured severe trauma. I'm also working with our senator here in Ohio, Senator Sherrod Brown, who is going to introduce the bill in the Senate. So I want you to look for that in coming days. I can tell you that I've had amazing dialogue over the years with Vice President-elect Kamala Harris in her role as a senator. We have talked about these issues and how we must come together and work more. Now, here's where you come in. One of the number one things, if we're going to have effective change, is advocacy. It is so important that we build our army of folks so we can be the advocates for those who have found themselves involved in human trafficking. So we want to make sure that you are talking to your senators and you are talking to our members of Congress, because this is not just an Ohio issue. It's a national issue. It's an international issue. So we need the support of everyone across the country. And I certainly look forward to working with you, groups like your groups, and of course, like the Links Incorporated. I am so proud that they have taken this initiative on across all of our chapters in Linkdom. And a special shout out to the Southern area for hosting this tonight and letting me have a small part in this. Thank you.
Not sure if you can hear me. There we go. Congresswoman Beatty, thank you for the work that you do tirelessly and have done for decades, not only in Congress, but in Ohio. We appreciate that. And those calls and letters, we'll be making them. We appreciate you. Thank you again.
Mr. Johnson, thank you. Your work, your reputation has been amazing in leading this for us tonight.
Thank you. So tonight, as we move forward, Congresswoman Beatty has given us a charge as what we need to do, but there are 3 parts of understanding what it means to know and recognize human trafficking. The first part is awareness. I'd like you to watch this video so that we can have a real conversation about what it means to be aware of human trafficking.
Human trafficking is slavery.
And it happens all over America.
Any child, any woman, any man could potentially become a victim of human trafficking.
I am a victim of labor trafficking.
I was a victim of child sex trafficking, but now I own my body.
Human trafficking is any kind of forced labor.
It can happen to anybody.
I am a mother.
I am an author.
I am a son.
I'm an advocate.
I am an educator.
I'm a sister.
I am a brother.
I'm so much more than what happened to me.
I am strong.
I am brave.
I am outspoken.
I am compassionate.
I am a survivor.
I'm a survivor.
I am a survivor.
I am a survivor.
I am a survivor.
I am a survivor of human trafficking.
As you can see from the many faces in front of you, human trafficking does not have one distinct face, and we're here to look at it now. Now, before we move forward, I want to remind you, you see everything around you, the environment is blue, and that's because green, the southern area of the Links Incorporated, and of course the Links themselves, are wearing blue because green goes blue. That is the color of awareness for human trafficking. And today, joining us on this conference in Town Hall, we have Mr. Frank H. Lee. Mr. Lee is the director of the Macon County Emergency Management Agency and the Department of Homeland Security. Mr. Lee, thanks so much for being a part of this Town Hall meeting.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yes, sir. Now, today, of course, is Wear Blue Day. What is it about blue that designates it? Why was it chosen as the color, the specific color for human trafficking awareness?
Anytime you have a marketing campaign and that campaign empowers people, you must have significant identifications. And blue was the color chosen to go on a national level to promote and to always use in the area of human trafficking. So it's a good way of identifying. It's a universal color that is being used for this particular objective.
And it's again the different kinds of blue. Sometimes I guess it's a way to get people aware and at least having the conversation like we're doing today. I noticed in your title we said that you were part of the Department of Homeland Security. Why is human trafficking considered a concern or something that Homeland Security is a part of? What is it about that particular thing that it interests Homeland Security, or why is it necessary to be in that department?
Well, basically, it has a lot to do a lot of times with international problems, and Homeland Security has a large gamut. It encompasses a lot of agencies, law enforcement, public safety. And once you put it under the Homeland Security umbrella, it entails and also gives an opportunity to bring a broad base of public services all under this particular cause. And that is simply the reason why it's under Homeland Security.
And when we talk about the community, and I know I did some work, as I talked earlier, with FLETC, the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. We put together some educational videos for the agents about human trafficking. What are the signs, though, that lay people in the community can look for to say, okay, here's some issues, and we need to pay attention and get the word to the authorities? What can just everyday folk look for?
Well, a lot of unusual activity in many cases, a lot of smaller environment, smaller towns and cities. You see an unusual attitude of people. You notice some strange people that are impacted in the area. They may come in and relocate, and a lot of times they may come in and relocate under some COVID areas, basically. And anytime that you see this and you see some strange activity that it's not normal, something that would bring some attention to you, you should maybe alert your local law enforcement, and don't hesitate to do that, because it's easy to identify strangers that come in the community and act in an unusual way.
And I guess when you look around, there's so many instances where people may just think their parents taking care of their children, or I think there was a Tyler Perry movie that came out last year where there were senior citizens that it wasn't trafficking, but they were being held hostage. There are signs that I guess maybe if you see something, say something, kind of like that moniker that TSA always says.
It is, and it's very important. And a lot of times we see this unusual activity, and persons who are involved in human trafficking are criminals. They have a great deal of criminal experience. They have a great deal of persuasion. They are able to come in and fit in, and they actually study and do research on their target. So it's very important. If you notice any unusual activity around seniors or young people, persons who pop up in communities, you must let authorities know about it.
I know you're in the Southeast, and we're talking about the Southern area, but there are people tuned into this from all around the country. Are there areas that are more hotspots, some that are more prone than others to experience human traffickers?
I would basically say there are not any hotspots. Human trafficking, it's a universal crime. It doesn't have any geographic specifics in regard to where they target areas. There are certain areas that are targeted in regard to communities, in regard to areas that they are in. But I personally would say that there are not any regions or any towns or any cities that are impacted. Human trafficking can be impacted at any point, at any time, at any place.
And I guess they just want to blend in, because that's the thing that kind of gets them through. Smaller communities are just as likely to have human trafficking going on as a New York City or Los Angeles.
The smaller towns and cities sometimes fall prey to it, because normally in those towns, everyone knows everyone. And once a person gets in and acclimates himself in the community, they fit in, and then they start performing their criminal activity. So it doesn't have any specifics in regard to where this particular activity can emanate. It can emanate anywhere. It can begin in smaller towns and larger cities. It has no bearing in that regard.
I wanted to ask, because there are a couple of other segments that I want to pull some other panelists in with yourself so we can get some of these questions answered. But when you are looking at, and I know you can't obviously give away trade secrets, but when you're monitoring, managing, or trying to get a handle on human trafficking. How do you, as law enforcement, how do you manage that? Because in some ways, it's hard to tell. How do you rely on us, people that aren't in law enforcement, to tell you?
We rely on performance. We rely on information. We rely on citizens that obviously see these unusual activities. And these unusual activities are reported. You'd be surprised how people are so vigilant in regard to this particular criminal activity. Locally in the Southeast, we have a lot of trafficking that emanates around interstate highways, and a lot of times people would come and set up various locations, rest stops, recreational facilities, public places where people gather. So basically, upon the general public to be vigilant, also provide information, intelligence, and information gathered mainly come from the general public.
I want to go to, I know there are a great deal of comments coming in as I see, and thank you all of the Links sisters and ladies and gentlemen who are around the country that are commenting. Thank you so much. And please remember that you can be a part of the conversation by leaving your comment. One of the questions I have for you, Mr. Lee, that's asked, what are some of the tips that we could teach our kids and young adults to keep them from ending up in situations where they could be trafficked?
Well, it's basic training that we call basic home training. We need to teach our kids, don't communicate with strangers. If you notice any activity, and now since we're in the days of technology and the internet, we find a lot of traffickers make contact with a lot of their victims through social media and the internet. So it's very important that we dwell on the fact that young people should be very vigilant in regard to communicating and making contact, communicating with people who they're not familiar with. Human traffickers do their research. They monitor social media. They collect their own intelligence, and they move forward when they do that. So we, as parents and as community individuals, must make sure that we stress upon all of our different entities that we're involved in, our churches, our schools, our community, and we must create our own sense of awareness in our own communities based on our needs, and mainly just disseminating information and mitigating the possibility of these hazards.
I think it goes back to being our brother's keeper. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, if there's injustice anywhere, there's injustice everywhere. And it means us being vigilant. Mr. Lee, thanks so much. Please stay with us because there's so many other questions that are coming in we want to ask you. And we're going to add some additional panelists to this. One of the other things that's important is advocacy. If there are human trafficking issues going on in different communities, being able to advocate for those people who may not have a voice to advocate for themselves is important. Take a look.
Today, if you saw somebody chained to a post, you would do something about it. But in the days of the transatlantic slave trade, it was a normal sight to see. It isn't as clear today of what modern slavery looks like, but by knowing the signs of human trafficking, you can help protect yourself and you can help protect others. Traffickers would often brand their victims with tattoos, using words such as daddy or cash. Trafficking victims may show sudden changes of dress and behavior. They may suddenly have possessions that they usually can't afford. They may have unusually long workouts. Victims may have new relationships with boyfriends or girlfriends that are noticeably older. And I'm not talking about a few years. Difficulty with making eye contact, especially with men. Victims may have untreated medical problems, such as cuts, bruises, burns, broken bones. They may miss school frequently, make frequent trips. Victims may be unable to speak independently. Other people may insist on answering questions for them, or even translating for them. Victims may even be frightened of authorities, seeing them as the bad guys. To request help or report possible human trafficking incidents, please call the National Human Trafficking Hotline, 1-888-3737-888, or text info or help at BeFree-233-733.
Being able to advocate, I think I am still muted. Oh, there we go. Okay. Being able to advocate for those who cannot advocate for themselves is important, as you see. We saw there were different faces, but we also see that those faces need voices. And joining me right now is the executive director of the International Human Trafficking Institute in Atlanta, Georgia. And she's also a social justice advocate. Please welcome Ms. Deborah Richardson. Ms. Richardson, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Really
now, you are the executive director of the Institute. What is the specific mission that you have at the Institute?
Our mission is to coordinate with all aspects of society, public, private, educational institutions, civic organizations, faith groups, so that we can have a concerted and organized effort to address human trafficking. We certainly, law enforcement or certain Homeland Security is on the front line, but there are so many societal conditions that cause young people to be vulnerable for exploitation, and we need to address the root causes. And that's what we're focused on doing.
And this work, especially now, is important during the pandemic. There was an article that you wrote recently, I'm looking at, about child exploitation. What are some of the issues that are coming up during that because of everything being in awry due to COVID-19?
You know, I call what is happening with child sexual exploitation as the epidemic within the pandemic. Beginning in the spring of 2020, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children had a 106% increase in calls from the cyber trafficking hotline. And by June, they had doubled the amount of calls that they'd had for the entire 2019. And the reason being is children were sheltering in place and virtually learning. They were on their internets, they're on their devices, and parents think that having a child on the device is a good thing. It keeps them occupied. But what they don't know is that child's device is the gateway to being approached by the predators, as you heard before. So there were children being approached for providing nude photos that went on pornography sites. There were children talking to who they thought were their boyfriends, but ended up being an older man. And so that has been the first thing that we've seen in terms of this increased activity online. And unfortunately, it's not slowing down.
Are the laws there, the teeth in the laws? Obviously, you got to find the perpetrators that are taking advantage of these kids. But are the laws there when it comes to having teeth to prevent people from getting to our kids?
Oh, absolutely. Congressman Beatty and others have done an excellent job in passing laws. In many states, I know states such as Florida is on this call, and Georgia particularly have done an excellent job with their laws. The problem is enforcement, particularly during the pandemic, with law enforcement being involved in first responder activities, managing the public health crises. Frankly, they have not been focused and not had much of attention on human trafficking. And so that's the gap, is our holding our elected officials accountable for enforcing the laws that have been passed.
So what are some of those root causes? I mean, when we look at all of these things in the community and we look at the fact that we've got the pandemic going on and you know, come on, we all know how kids are. When kids go in the room and want to close the door and touch the devices. What do you see as being the root causes, and what can we as a community look out for to keep our kids out of those situations?
Well, you talked about it in your opening remarks. That is vulnerability. So think about it. During the time that we were sheltering in place, and even now, a mother who's a first responder and has to go to work is not able to do her work from at home, but her child is still virtually learning. If she doesn't have money for a babysitter or all-day child care, she's leaving that child at home. If there's an older child, that older child's responsible for looking after the children, but they're pretty much online all day, because they don't have adult supervision. So that's been a particular issue during the pandemic. But then we know that Black and brown children are disproportionately targeted to be trafficked. We also know that trafficked children, more likely than not, are in the foster or child welfare system. And prior sexual abuse has been a gateway for exploitation. I opened the first safe house in the Southeast in the year 2021. And every young woman that we had come in that safe house had a record of prior sexual abuse. So those are some of the risk factors that lead to that vulnerability to being exploited.
And being able to recognize that training and resources are so important. How does the Institute play a role in ensuring that the resources get to the community and that we know what to look for and that we're trained so that we can be available to put a stop to human trafficking?
Thank you for asking that. We offer 2 free online trainings. First one is Learn, See, Do Something to End Human Trafficking, when we talk about all forms of trafficking, especially labor trafficking. We spend a lot of time in the United States talking about sex trafficking, but as you've seen in the videos, there are actually more people trafficked for labor. So we talk about that, and you're able to learn what it looks like and what to do about it. The second training we started during the pandemic, and that is what you need to know to keep your child safe online. And that goes directly to what I've been talking about, the risk factors of your children be online, how you can monitor what they're seeing, how you can put controls on their devices so they cannot have access to other sites, and how to talk to your children about human trafficking. We talk to our children about stranger danger, but the reality is 49% of children who are exploited know their exploiter. They're a family friend, they're a neighbor, they're a coach, they're a mentor. There could be the pastor of their church. And so what we have to do is begin talking with children about this so they see it, they have the tools that to keep themselves safe, and more importantly, tell you first thing when that occurs to them.
Now, I want to bring in, I do have a couple more questions for you, Ms. Richardson, but I think Nikki's standing by. Do we have Nikki available? I want to bring Nikki into the conversation. Hey, Nikki, thank you so much.
Hi.
Nikki Street Grace, good to have you with us. You are a community activist and a leader in the community. And I want to bring you into the conversation because you are able to give us a bit more, even insight as to prevent human trafficking. And based on your insight as a community activist, I want to talk about youth because, as Deborah said earlier, youth are a big part of this thing. How can we support the youth that are surviving to help them get back to a place of some kind of normalcy?
Well, the first thing I think we have to look at is the fact of what's being exploited in them. And for me as a survivor, the 3 things that were exploited in me were beauty, value, and purpose. And we have to look at the fact that every child is beautiful, every child has value, and every child has purpose. And what are we doing as a community, as family members, as friends, as leaders in the community, as survivors in the community, whether that's churches, whoever is a part of that child's life, what are we doing to show them where their true value is, where their true purpose is, and where their true beauty is? Do we make them feel that beauty is more than skin deep, or are they still learning that through the movies that they watch, the videos that they watch? Because music will show them exactly who they think they need to be like. Videos will show them that. The movies, the music industry, whoever we allow them to be their role models will show them the things that we're not showing them. So that's the first thing. And then, what adds value to their life? If we're sitting them in front of a screen all day to learn school, and then we're sitting them in front of a screen all day at night when we get home from work and we've had a hard day because the pandemic is also causing us issues as well, are we showing them that they're priceless? Are we showing them that they have this value and this purpose that they can add to society aside from a global pandemic that we're all going through, and aside from what their friends tell them, and aside from what they may be learning at school? Are we truly giving them that value and that purpose that they really have inside of them? Because if not, someone else is going to show that to them for us. And unfortunately, our youth today, they're going to get it however they can get it. And so at Street Grace, what we have is a help blocker on TikTok. So any child or any adult that goes on TikTok can go to @helpblocker, and they can see where we try to show youth today something different, because they're actually getting on there telling us, okay, well, I was groomed at 13 years old. I was groomed at 12 years old by my uncle or my dad or my mom, and this is how it made me feel. But they may not be going and telling someone else in the community that because they're too scared to, because some of us just aren't teaching them value and purpose. I know for me, I wasn't taught that. So because I wasn't taught that, I found it in things in the world at a younger age. And by the time I was 19, I was sold for the first time. So look at those things that you're teaching them, and really look at the value in everything, because a screen can teach them a whole lot more sometimes than I think sometimes what we do.
Because
so
there's
that
that intimacy. There's an intimacy that they have with the screen right there.
Yeah.
I want to ask you to repeat. It's at Help Walker. Is that at TikTok
Help
and
Locker.
Say it again.
Help Locker, like a school locker.
Yes.
Locker.
Gotcha. Help Locker. Gotcha. Okay.
Help Locker.
I want to see if we can get that on the screen. Help Locker. If we can put that up, and I'm going to put it out as well. I think that's really important, because hearing these stories are what gets us able to move forward. I want to also bring Deborah. I have a question for you as well. When you're talking about communication with resources from churches and community organizations, faith-based institutions, what are some of the resources available so that those organizations, and it could be an urban league, any of those things, what can they do and get from your organization to assist with stopping this practice?
So one of the things we do is that we have the training that we offer them. And if it's a formal organization, we ask them to look at their bylaws, at their, if it's a company, their human resources policies, their vendor contracts, to make sure they have anti-human trafficking stipulations in them. A lot of organizations and companies unknowingly will hire a company because they had the lowest bid, not realizing the reason they have that lowest bid is because they're using traffic labor. So we do a 360 in helping individual groups to create their human trafficking response within the particular category that they're working in. And we've done that now for about 140 organizations.
And Nikki, I want to also go back to you. And I know you said one of the reasons that you said you were sold for the first time around age 19. What are the ages that you're seeing this happen? Because honestly, I know many parents, they probably, almost every parent thinks they're doing the right thing. This is not a condemnation of anyone.
No,
what are the ages that you see that happening in its initial movement when it comes to kids in sex trafficking or human trafficking?
I think that's kind of people like to use statistics of like 14 to 16 for girls. And I think sometimes that's a hard thing to look at, because you see all the time on the news that it can be any age and any child. But I think generally speaking, the age is anywhere between 12 to 16 years old. When you think about online, because, being the chair of the Survivor Advisory Board, I deal with adult survivors. But working in the survivor community and being in the survivor community, I mean, you can see 12 years old, you can get online and go on TikTok, and you can see where kids are talking about, I was groomed. And then you can see where, you watch the news and it was at 11 years old, a girl was being trafficked by her parents for drugs. And so I think when we think about the youth of today, when we think about the runaways that was mentioned and foster kids that were mentioned, kids go into foster care at 9 years old. So I don't believe really when we think about youth, I think we need to think broad spectrum and not just label an actual age to it. We need to think about how we can help the youth of today and advocate for youth of all ages, because I think putting an age limit on it really limits what we do for our youth today.
And just awareness is important. And I think a lot of us too, we think about what we see on the big level. We think Jeffrey Epstein, right? And Ghislaine Maxwell, and we see these big splashy things, but it could be something as small as our community. So the next segment is, what can we do? We talked about looking out for it. We talked about seeing it. We talked about having voices in our community and what our organizations can do. But the question stems, how can we take action? And action is probably the most important name of the game.
Dozens of children rescued in Atlanta recently resulted in human trafficking and parental kidnapping charges. But as we have shown you over the years, it is a problem that affects areas here in the upstate as well. Tonight, 7 News reporter Ayla Ferrone has the latest on the efforts to stop human trafficking locally.
A massive human trafficking bus just down the I-85 corridor is shedding new light on the issue right here in the upstate and the problems caused by the pandemic. U.S. Marshals rescued dozens of children recently in Atlanta, many who were human trafficking victims. That's bringing attention to the issue here in the upstate. Beth Mezek is the executive director with Jasmine Road, an organization that helps victims of human trafficking. One of the problems the pandemic has created is children on the internet more, making them more susceptible to traffickers. Mezek says the situation in Atlanta has also showed exactly who can be committing these crimes.
Beginning to understand that it could be a parent, it could be an uncle. So that's more of a non-traditional way that someone may not think of trafficking in that way, but that is something that we see all the time at Jasmine Road with women that have been in our program.
Jasmine Road has all sorts of opportunities for the public to learn the warning signs of human trafficking. We'll have more information on how you can help on our website, WSPA.com. I'm in Greenville, Ayla Ferrone, 7 News.
The city of Greenville received a grant at the beginning of 2020 to study the awareness of human trafficking in the community. The city tells 7 News those plans are still on track.
So is Human Trafficking Awareness Month and Day. We're going to bring everyone back, but as you see, action is important. Looking at some of the startling statistics that are here, 55% of the victims of sex trafficking are minors, and they met the people that are trafficking them on mobile apps. We'll let that hang out there for a moment. They met them on mobile apps, and how many of us have our kids with mobile phones that may not have parental controls on them? Just something to think about. And following shelter-in-place orders, these are just by the numbers. The trafficking hotline increased, as was said earlier by Ms. Richardson, 40%. 40% because there was nothing else to do. These traffickers went and preyed on our kids. So it's important that we set parental controls, that we're looking at privacy. It's not that we're invading their privacy, it's that we're keeping them safe. And that's part of it. I want to start out with you, Mr. Lee. We talked about billboards that have been used to hopefully work in the community to talk about human trafficking and get people aware. Are there any data, any kinds of data that says that the strategy of putting billboards and having these conversations are things that people can see in our communities? Has that been effective?
Well, obviously, billboards see on a daily basis. They read as we how process. The digital billboard scheme is popular in all of the states. So I don't have any specific data on how impactful billboards are, but I can tell you they have a great deal of impact as far as appearance in regard to promoting and mitigating the areas of human trafficking. More importantly, now the live digital billboards are very, very helpful in all phases of advertising. We find it very helpful in human trafficking, as well as forms of public outdoor advertising.
One of the things too, I want to also bring in, we have Dr. Rosalind Osgood from the Links. I know we see her there, and Dr. Osgood is the chair of the Legislative Issues, Public Affairs, and Disaster Relief Committee. So just want to make sure that we welcome you to the fold, Dr. Osgood. So good having you with us. Thank you. Thank you. Deborah, I wanted to ask you, e-commerce and human trafficking. It's a big thing. There was this huge thing, I'm sure we've all heard about it. And I know I'm a college professor, and a lot of my students came to class and were like, Mr. Johnson, Dr. Johnson, look at this. I've got this thing about, what was it, Wayfair? There was this Wayfair thing. And so a lot of us looked at it as conspiracy theory. But one of the things I have my students do is do some research to say, this may be a conspiracy theory, but it could lead to something that's actually happening. Explain to us how e-commerce and human trafficking are interrelated.
Well, yeah, I'm going to have to disagree with you because in my 20 years working with human trafficking, it just, for instance, the theory around this, the Wayfair boxes, that there is like this 800,000 missing children out here that are being shipped in boxes. The Polaris, the National Human Trafficking Hotline, the Missing and Exploited Children have all debunked that. It is not fact. And as a matter of fact, I just wrote an article that you can Google talking about the QAnon movement. But I tell you what does occur that we don't think about is that we are not holding the cause of this which are the predators, which are the primarily men who are driving the market. If we want to end human trafficking, we have to start arresting and convicting the men who are driving the market for sex. Jeffrey Epstein is certainly the poster child, but 24% of men who are convicted of having sex with a child never spend a day in jail. That is outrageous. And if you're talking about advocacy, as women, we really need to stand up and make a lot of noise about these men being charged, convicted, and walking away so they can perpetrate their crime on yet another one of our children.
Ms. Richardson, I gotta ask, how is that? That is mind blowing. And I'm sure Mr. Lee, Dr. Osgood, I mean, this is mind blowing that the statistics are that big about these men not being prosecuted who are committing the acts. What is, I know I heard I was in conversation as an interview, and one of the people didn't want to divulge the names of the folk, but there was a situation where the uncle ended up abusing the niece, the biological niece, and the mother of the little girl would not press charges. Stood up.
Right.
Is that some of the issues that we're seeing?
Well, that's a good case because that mother should not have had that right because that uncle just committed a class 1 felony. So the mother should have not had the right not to press the charges. Law enforcement and our judicial system should have forced that. But the reason is, and I'm not talking about traffickers, I'm talking about men who are driving the demand. We have found studies that said the majority of men who are driving demand are white, make $100,000 or more, married with 2 children. And so these are men who have positions, who have stature in the community, and that's why they get the walk.
Yeah.
Black and brown men who are, if they are caught, they'll get convicted, but a white middle-class male, 24% of them walk out the door and resume their lives.
Thank you for sharing that. I do have some other questions for you, but Dr. Osgood, I wanted to ask your role as chair of this legislative, the committee, the legislative issues, public affairs, and disaster relief. What exactly is that role, and what does your committee do to help in the community?
Well, my committee helps to organize the links chapters across the Southern area. And we are very engaged in the community around public issues, and human trafficking is a priority for us. We work in our community to help address issues around social injustice, to care for people, and to make sure that things like this are not just forgotten or not spoken about. So we are organized across our 7 states. We have chapters located throughout those states, and we work around signature initiatives to provide quality programming through a service delivery model. So we run our chapters and our programming like nonprofit organizations to make sure that we have measurable outcomes to address the problems that we identify in our needs statements.
Thank you for sharing that. And the community can obviously find, I mean, there's so many ways that you go out, not just with the link, but to engage the community as a whole. So thank you for that work that you do. Ms. Richardson, one of the questions I have for you, chocolate, Uber, and human trafficking. Help me understand the relationship between those things.
Well, 2 years ago, right before the Super Bowl was hosted in Atlanta, I trained 10,000 Super Bowl volunteers and 5,000 shared ride drivers. And in every one of those trainings I did for the shared ride drivers, they had firsthand knowledge of seeing human trafficking activity, but didn't know what it looked like. Back when we were moving around, the traffickers would send the young women or boys, let's remember boys are trafficked too, they would send them in shared rides like an Uber to the site where the predator was. And the very first training I did, there was an Uber driver that had picked up 2 girls from a 5-star hotel in Atlanta at 6:30 in the morning and taken them to the parking lot of a public school system. So this is the case of 2 girls being bought by a predator that was in a 5-star hotel who was going to school every day. And so having those drivers being able to recognize the signs and to understand what to look for, they were really valuable in helping us rescue 38 children within the 3 weeks before and after the Super Bowl.
It's just still almost mind-boggling. One of the things too, and I thank you for sharing that story, and for you to say 10,000. I mean, and you're saying everyone had a story to tell, which is again something that we look at, and we've all probably seen it and just didn't know. Mr. Lee, truckers are traveling this community back and forth all across the United States from one side to the other. Are they a part of the solution or the concern with human trafficking? Why do you think truckers are somebody that we need to pay attention to, or that can help put an end to trafficking?
You know, truckers have a very, very important role. They cover a lot of areas. They travel the interstates, they travel the secondary roads and the primary roads. They see a lot. They notice a lot in their normal routine of duty. So yes, the truckers can be of help in one regard, and then in another regard, truckers can be a problem. A lot of trafficking happens around travel centers and truck stops, and truckers sometimes are the ones who are guilty of committing these crimes. So I think it's a give and take situation. We have certainly gathered a lot of information, a lot of intelligence from truckers. There are some good truckers, there's some bad truckers, just like there's some good people and bad people. So I see there's some pros and cons of utilizing this form of intelligence to help mitigate this problem.
One of the other things too, as I'm looking here, it says that they can that as you said, they're sometimes involved in transporting, which nobody's. Again, you think that they're with those stops that we see on the road that people are checking, but sometimes they have, as you said, come up with sophisticated ways to get through these dragnets, so to speak. What can we do to weaken or ultimately eradicate human trafficking? It's something that when we think about it, and I think a lot of us think, when I brought that up in my class, students thought slavery. So they thought something that was not in America, that was in a third world country. What can we do bit by bit to make sure that this stops in our lifetime?
Well, I think one of the biggest problems we have to do is advocate for new laws, legislative laws, state or federal laws, because there are a lot of things that encompass this problem. And when this problem initiated, we didn't have all of the necessary amenities that we have in our society today. The internet, social media, all forms of electronic and print media is also used, incorporated. So I think the first thing that we need to do is talk to our local legislators, talk to our federal legislators, and try to strengthen the law, these laws regular, and trying to improve prosecuting people who commit these crimes.
I wanted to ask you, Dr. Osgood, I know the links are doing some, as you said, work across the region, about the area, throughout the southern area, and of course, I'm sure nationally as well. Are there any specific things, though, that you want to highlight in the different parts of the southern area that the links are doing, or that maybe people in the community could be a part of to help assist this work so that we can bring an end to human trafficking? I think you're muted, Dr. Osgood.
As the Southern Area Links work across the 7 states in the Bahamas, it's very important to partner with community organizations. Each state and county has either a human trafficking coalition or a task force that's focused primarily on eliminating human trafficking. Those entities are prepared to share resources, to provide training, and to help individuals strengthen their understanding of human trafficking. I'm also a school board member in Broward County, so I know that most states have passed legislation to make it mandatory that human trafficking education is taught in local school districts. And many school districts are doing it, but they're not doing it 100%. So the Links chapter and other community-based organizations and individuals can check in with their school districts to make sure that those courses are being offered as they have been mandated by the state legislator to be offered.
Thank you. And we'll be looking for those things so that the community as a whole can be involved. I wanted to end as we begin to wrap up and see if there are final thoughts. Of course, this is a Wear Blue Day. All of us have on blue in some way, shape, or form because we want to make sure that we bring awareness to this human trafficking problem. But as we bring this to a close and wrap it up, are there any final thoughts or charges that any of you would give to community organizations or individuals that are watching so that this we do our part individually? We'll start with you, Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee, I think you're muted.
Okay.
There we go. Yes, sir.
Commend the links for standing job by community awareness. I think all of this starts at the local level, starts in our city, starts in our community organizations, our churches, and our schools. We have to start providing an opportunity to let everybody know that this is a very serious crime. It's a crime that has increased over the years. It's a crime that impacts every community in the United States. And for us to advocate from organizations like the Links Incorporated, it does put a very big dent in mitigating this problem that impacts us not only in the United States, but from an international level as well.
Thank you. Ms. Richardson?
I hope that everyone on the call would go to the International Human Trafficking website. You can read about the trainings that we offer, and then you can also read about the QAnon issue that we just discussed earlier in this call. The more educated we are, the more that we can share with others, and the more that we need to be absolutely resolute about ending this huge human rights violation during our lifetime. Thank you.
Thank you. And your article will be a part of my class, some of your articles this semester. So thank you. Thank you. Dr. Osgood.
Certainly, as we heard from a policymaker at the start of our call, it is critical as we raise awareness that we engage and hold elected officials accountable. Make sure that we're interacting with our state legislators to let them know how concerned we are about human trafficking and the things that we want to see in legislation, as many of them were stated earlier about the disparity in the way that white people or white men are prosecuted compared to Black men. So legislation and policy change is what really needs to happen. And once those policies have been changed and put into law, then we need to hold those institutions that are responsible for implementing those policies accountable to make sure that change is not just in law, but it's actually practical in our local communities, that we see results and we see changes, that our children don't continue to be victims of human trafficking, even sometimes victimized and participating in human trafficking, even after school, where parents think that they have a part-time job, but they're actually participating in some type of effort of a pimp because we're not paying attention.
Dr. Osgood, thank you very much. And I'd like to offer thank you on behalf of the entire committee to Nikki Street Case, Deborah Richardson, Frank Lee, Roslyn Osgood, and of course, Congresswoman Joyce Beatty. Thank you for sharing your time and talent with us. Thank you for also inviting me. I'd like to thank my god sister and dear friend, the area director of the Southern area of the Links, Sylvia Perry, for asking me to be a part of this. And this means the world that we can do our part to end human trafficking. So the charge has been set. What you have to do is to not only put work together with awareness, advocacy, and action, but make sure if you see something, definitely say something. Here's a message from Tyler Perry, and we look forward to seeing you again. On behalf of the Southern area of the Links, I'm Rockman Johnson. Good evening.
Human trafficking is a crime often hidden in plain sight. We like to think that it only happens in other places and only affects other people, but sadly it's happening right here in our backyard in Georgia, in small towns and big cities. Thousands of victims are trapped and they need our help. Unfortunately, many are being trafficked by the very people that they trust the most, like their friends and family. It is critically important to know the warning signs of sex trafficking and how to report suspicious activity. It can save someone's life. To learn more, you can take Georgia First Lady Marty Kemp's Human Trafficking Awareness Training. And if you or someone you know needs help, call the National Human Trafficking Hotline at 1-888-373-7888. Working together, we can be the force of good that ends human trafficking once and for all.